Yeah, so what I thought would be kind of fun for the two of us to talk about, especially dropping out of college. So I dropped out of college. You obviously did pretty much the opposite. We sort of took completely opposite routes on that one. So yeah, that's been something that's been on my mind a little bit. Like I said, I used to think about it all the time because sort of like when you're a college age person who's not in college, that's sort of like your status as a human is like college dropout. It's, you know, it's almost like a title at that point. You know, I'm no longer college age. Most of my peers graduated from school, so it's not something that's like top of mind for me lately. But but it's still sometimes something people ask me about, and I thought it could be a fun thing for us to talk about today.
Okay, yeah, this is an awesome topic. Yeah, so as the context, I went to way too many years of school, and I'm still in school, I guess. I made my way out. I was at Google for about a year as a full-time software engineer after my PhD, but then I went back into academia. So I've been in school like forever, and like ever since I can remember, and that's very much in contrast with your experience. So yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So tell me about your thoughts about, dropping out of college early and going into the tech industry, and what's on your mind now, many years later?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my perspective on it hasn't changed tremendously. I guess the biggest change for me is that when I initially left, I was on leave. I mean, I think most people, when they drop out, start as being on leave. And different schools have different leave policies. So I dropped out of Carnegie Mellon, and Carnegie Mellon has a 2-year leave policy. And I've now been out of school for, I guess, like 3.5 years. So I have expired my leave at this point. But definitely when I left, there was like this possibility that I might go back. But there have just been like so many interesting things that I've been able to do without being in school that it's never seemed right, like the right time to try to go back to college. And so if I were to go back to school at this point, it would be because it would probably be because I like I could imagine being in a place where I sort of don't really know what I want to do next, and I want to like explore a bunch of different things, and I want to get deeper on some subject, and I could see myself going back to school under those circumstances. But I think when I initially left, I was thinking like, oh, it's possible that I would feel that I just need to go back to college, and I don't think I'll feel that way anytime soon. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, given your background and your work and the industry you're in and the social environment you surround yourself with, it's kind of like it's sort of like a simulation of, maybe the best parts of doing a computer science undergraduate degree, without all the other parts that you might not want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. One thing is that I definitely, in my role here at Chain, should I like give some background on like who I am and what? Okay, cool. Yeah, so my name is Tess. I started as a computer science studying freshman at the University of Pennsylvania. And I got really, really caught up in going to hackathons and interning, and I was doing all of those things and enjoying them more than the school part of school. And so I thought about dropping out then, but a bunch of people, including my parents, convinced me that I should stay in school and maybe try a different school. So I transferred to Carnegie Mellon, and discovered that that wasn't really what I wanted to do either. And I also had this really cool opportunity to go work at Medium. And so I did that. And like I was saying, I sort of started out being on leave. But after I would say a year, it was pretty obvious that I wasn't going to go back before my leave was up. And I was at Medium working on a whole bunch of different stuff. I was kind of a full stack engineer, but as I matured, I guess I became more of a like back-end infrastructure engineer. So I was there for almost 2 years, and then I went and I joined Chain, which is where I am now. And Chain builds these like enterprise grade open source blockchains. So I've been working here doing that kind of thing, doing very much like back-end infrastructure work here for about 1.5 years.
Cool. So I guess two things that I thought of. One is maybe it's Pennsylvania. Maybe there's something about Pennsylvania.
It's
and
yeah.
second thing is, can you tell a little bit about how you got that first Medium internship, and then that's kind of what got you on your way to
totally.
Pennsylvania.
So one note, I'll talk about Pennsylvania first. It is kind of funny that I went to 2 Pennsylvania schools. I'm not from Pennsylvania. I liked Philly well enough. Pittsburgh was not really the place for me. Yeah, so maybe it's Pennsylvania. But to answer your other question about finding that initial internship, initial internship at Medium, I like made a lot of friends on the internet, including you, who were largely like full-time, older full-time engineers, people who I looked up to and wanted to work with. I mean, I was mentioning earlier, like, hey, remember when I was almost your intern? It was that kind of thing. So it's actually a similar kind of dynamic with Jean Shu, who works at Medium. And she reached out to me and was like, hey, we're thinking about hiring interns. And so I was sort of like their intern guinea pig. And I started, what happened there was I was the first intern they hired. So I was like kind of the interview guinea pig. And then I was also the first intern to start because I started like in the spring rather than in the summer. Oh, right. And then they had other interns that summer, but that sort of overlapped more with like my full-time, like once I started full-time. So what happened there was I started as an intern, and after like a month, I was like, this is just so much more fun. Like, I feel like I'm learning a ton of stuff. This is, I think, what I would want to do. And I was pretty sure that that was like pretty much exactly what I would have wanted to do after graduation anyway. That I went to the CTO and I was like, hey, can I just stay? And I think he kind of knew, like, because I'd started my internship early and all these other things, he knew that I wasn't, set on a like traditional college path or anything like that. And he was like initially like a little bit reluctant, actually. He was like, I don't want anyone to drop out of school, like, to join this company. And I was like, hey, so what if I am going to drop out anyway? Like, if it's not on you, like, how do you feel about it? And then they made me an offer after I said that. And like, I don't know if that's true, really. Like, I think it would have been really hard for me to drop out without a solid plan. Right. And when people ask me, like, should I drop out of school? Usually I say, like, I really don't think anyone should drop out of school unless they have a pretty solid idea of what they're going to do, to keep learning instead of being in college. So even though I said like I was going to drop out anyway, it's like, who knows what I really would have done. But yeah.
So I guess going back to I guess meeting Jean for the first time, like, how did you know about your work? Was this through your blogging or was this through something? Because I first knew about you from your blogging like a long time ago. So
yeah, it was about the same period of time that I met her. So sort of like through blogging, she had also had a blog and was writing also about specifically some women in tech stuff. And I think that was how I met her. But, sometimes with people you meet on Twitter, it's like, you don't really know exactly like who started following whom and why. But it's like people end up being, Twitter friends.
Right. Because I remember that I knew about you because you wrote a few things about, both women in tech issues and also hackathon, inclusion in hackathons and your experiences organizing hackathons and such. So do you think that was that's sort of what you were saying, and even your first year in college, that was when the hackathon scene started coming up. And, do you feel like that was kind of your way of, getting more widely known through that sort of medium?
Yeah, I mean, I think hackathons are really important to like me becoming a person who was interesting, if that makes sense. Like that was kind of what helped me distinguish myself as being like just another college freshman to like being a college freshman who does things was pretty much all through hackathons. And that was sort of like, a lot of that was like dumb luck on my part because I was a freshman at Penn, which started sort of like the first really big college hackathon, Penn Apps. And, Penn Apps, the very first one I think was in like 2010 or 2009, but it was a very internal, like Penn only thing for the first 2 years. And then about when I was getting into it, it was beginning to open up to other schools. And when I was a freshman, it was like 150 to 200 participants in this event, which was like a really, really great way to get started. And now these things have like thousands of people and like tens of thousands of applicants for them, which is just like kind of mind-boggling to me. But I sort of had the fortune of showing up at the right time
Right.
to be able to really like make the most of those.
Right. Well, and also you're the kind of person that, is able to, maximally take advantage of that environment, right? I mean, a lot of people showed up at that right time. And, if you
Sure.
had, if you had come to college as a freshman when some other thing was really interesting in computing, you might have been likely to absorb that as well because
Yeah.
you're a curious kind of person. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's actually something else that I have been, some of my other dropout friends who also dropped out. So I dropped out in early 2013. And some of my other dropout friends who dropped out that year. And I have often wondered if we also happened to drop out during sort of like a sweet spot of like if we happen to sort of time that well.
Yeah, I think so. Because I mean, I remember when I was a freshman, 50 years ago or something. Now, I was a freshman in 2001, 2002. It was kind of a global recession. It wasn't like terrible. It was post 9/11. So it was
Sure.
like, economy is doing bad. The world was a bad place and, it was in bad shape. And I remember that summer after my freshman year, a lot of people, even going to MIT, or even going to top schools, a lot of students had trouble getting internships because hiring was not really good.
Right.
And I remember in the years, before that, and, I mean, you grew up in Seattle, so in the late 90s, it was a dot-com boom, and everyone's getting all these awesome Microsoft jobs, including yourself, some awesome jobs in Seattle. But I remember that period was just a low period for tech hiring. So, and also probably 2008, I'm sure after the global meltdown, it was a low period for hiring. So I think that's absolutely right that you and your cohort kind of came of age at this time when tech hiring was booming again, when there's a lot of VC money, when there's a hackathon scene. So it was a very ripe time for doing this sort of thing. So yeah, so I mean, now that you're several years into it, what was your kind of motivation for bringing up this topic at this point of your life? Given that you've established yourself in the tech industry, for a few years, and you've established your technical credentials, you've worked at several companies that are, doing well and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
I guess I wanted to bring it up because, not because I think it's past me exactly, but because I feel like I can, like it's stabilized a little bit. My perspective on it has stabilized a bit. And a lot of the things that, I'm like curious about or learning more about really are things that I'm like curious about learning more about, still forming, thoughts and perspectives and opinions on them. And so, I was thinking about some of the other things I thought about talking about were like, like this year I've done a lot of reading about consensus algorithms or like database stuff. And those are things that like I've been learning about. And those are like technical subjects that I could talk about. But even in thinking about those things and the ways that I've approached them reminded me of like being a dropout in kind of a funny way, because when I started like reading these papers about these things, sometimes I would feel like, oh, I wish I had had a little bit more like formal math. Because like this notation, if I could read this notation intuitively, like this would go faster, for example. And that's also actually really the only moments so far where I felt like, oh, I might have missed something in college. So even in like thinking about other things that I could talk about, it kind of came up. And I thought it would be fun to like talk about with you because
Yeah.
we've taken such different approaches.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to bring up. And I talked to other folks who, I mean, even college graduates, you know,
Yeah.
later on in their careers who are trying to learn new concepts and maybe dive into more theoretical stuff. And they kind of always have this inkling that, oh, if I had done more formal math in school or algorithms or
Sure.
proofs or something or operating systems or databases, I might have had a better foundation in that. And I think that, you know, there's a bit of truth in that, but also I think that may idealize the school environment a bit, in the sense of, you know, most people going through an undergraduate curriculum in, say, computer science. So if you were still at Carnegie Mellon or at MIT where I was, you're taking a lot of classes, you're really busy, you're doing a lot of stuff, you're not really absorbing any of the stuff in a lot of depth. Unless you really want to, right? I mean, the great thing about school is you have the chance to do that because you don't need to worry about, oh, I got to ship this code next week. So if you really are into discrete math and you then you can actually dive into it and go above and beyond and talk to professors about research and graduate students and stuff. But I feel like the default academic undergraduate experience is probably, you know, in terms of, you know, let's say that a parallel universe test had gone through school and got in your same position. Even if you're reading those papers now and studying that, you still have to relearn a lot of the old stuff. And it's not like anyone who goes through college remembers how to do all these crazy math algorithms, right? So, so I guess my point is I don't think the gap is actually as big as perhaps people perceive it to be, because most people coming out of college are not going to remember everything they learn. But I think a benefit of college is that it is a forcing function, at least, for people to have a broad set of kind of basic skills. It kind of forces you to do that, even if you feel like, oh, I'm not a math person, I don't like math, but you have to take a discrete math course and do proofs. And okay, like I kind of see, something about that.
Yeah, sure. So like, I guess given all of that, as a professor, like what, what are your goals in like teaching and supporting students? Like given that sort of, this is not a particularly well-formed question, but like, I guess it's just like, given that perspective, how does that inform your teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. That's something I think about a lot. So, I mean, the question is really, given that I know from my own undergraduate experience and talking to a bunch of people that really the truth is you don't remember most of the stuff you learn in college because you're taking too many classes, you're doing too many activities, especially as an undergrad, right? And you're doing a lot of activities, taking a lot of classes, you're kind of doing all the assignments last minute, cramming for the test, getting through it. So what, as a professor, what is the best thing to impart? And I think that, in my classes, I really emphasize, I guess it differs for every class, but, some kind of design principles or ways of thinking that may generalize beyond this class, and also a mix of both really practical things maybe, but also a mix of things that, I guess another thing I try to teach is things that you may not learn by yourself outside in the world. And also this is why I guess taking it farther, like learning this kind of mathematical foundations or, learning physics or math or even, writing or rhetoric or philosophy or those sorts of things that are not as quote unquote practical in the real world are probably some of the best things to learn in school because you will never get a forcing function to learn that otherwise. So,
yeah, that's a good point.
I also acknowledge at the same time that, students' attention spans are limited because they're multiplexing between several things all at once. And, I don't have the expectation that my class is the only thing they're going to focus on and think about all their lives, right?
Yeah.
So giving good information, even knowing that their attention is divided, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that was one thing that I appreciated about starting to work full time was being able to like devote my attention to something like full time. And to not have to sort of like bounce back and forth between solving a bunch of, obviously like in working, there's lots of different problems. You're solving lots of different kinds of problems and things like that. But there was sort of this, the sort of like clarity of focus was really helpful for me and something that I enjoyed when I made the switch.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And as an undergraduate experience in college, I think one of the good things is that you get to try a bunch of different things and be exposed to stuff, right? Even if in your work, we talk about this a lot in tech, is that in theory, you could learn all the stuff online or from mentors or from coding boot camps or from doing internships or volunteering and stuff, you can learn all the practical skills you need to do your job.
Yeah.
So then what's the point of going to college? And maybe one of the points is that you get purposely exposed to these different things that you would never otherwise get exposed to, because if you're working, you have a mission that you're doing, and you don't have time to read philosophy papers.
Yeah,
So,
totally. Yeah, I mean, and like for me too, you know, sometimes when people are like, "Oh, should I even go to school?" I'm like, definitely go try it out. like, like find out, you know, if you like it, find out what you like, and also get like some of the social experience. For me, I think that was one of the things that was like most, like, tangibly something that I would not have gotten anywhere else, was this like experience of living with a bunch of other people, like a bunch of other peers, and sort of all of the, you know, assorted things that came with that, the clubs and things like that, that I just would never have had otherwise. And like I kind of needed that too, because I grew up in like a tech city. I went to a school filled with other, you know, like tons of my high school classmates had parents who had been at Microsoft and things like that. And I like kind of left this like tech bubble a little bit, went to college, met people from like all over the country, and then like came back to another tech city. And like, I'm really glad I like got out of that at least a little bit, and like met people who were headed towards other industries and things like that. Because honestly, like overwhelmingly, obviously the people I work with now in the tech industry are all tech industry people, but even growing up like in Seattle, you know, a huge part of my life was tech industry oriented. And it was really good for me to like get out and meet people who had different values or different goals and different experiences and things like that. Which I guess is also like a corny college thing, but it was.
Yeah, you're like you should be on the homepage of all these private college brochures, you know, and like there's a big test video, like a testimonial, like right when you go on the homepage.
I mean, to be clear, some of that was also like actually extremely unpleasant. Like I experienced like unashamed, like unabashed misogyny and racism for the first time, which like you don't really see as much on the West Coast, I feel, because it's like yes, lots of racist stuff happens here, but it's like more subtle. Whereas I feel like on the East Coast and like at, you know, honestly, like on some of these campuses, there was more direct, just like discrimination from students. That's not really the right way to put that, but like there were people who were like unashamed of saying like, oh yeah, like women aren't as good at programming, which like I'd never heard on the West Coast, because like people just don't say that. Even if people think that here, they would never say it. And so like, to be clear, it wasn't all like, oh, I was exposed to all these different viewpoints and it was awesome. Like I was exposed to all these different viewpoints, and sometimes it was awesome, and like sometimes it was also extremely unpleasant. But like I'm still really glad that I did that, because it was extremely educational.
Yeah, I mean, that's another forcing function element. I mean, I guess the theme that's emerging is that really college is the time that forces you out of your upbringing that you came from, you know, whatever area you grew up in, and especially if you're going to a private school not near home, where people from all over the country are going. So for a lot of students, you know, they want to get to the point of differentiating themselves, you know, from a technical perspective and from a career perspective, as you've been able to do even during your freshman year. So, and I think that, like, you know, for a lot of students, one of the challenges is, you know, especially in a big school like San Diego, where there's like a bazillion undergrads majoring in computer science or related majors and HCI and stuff. One of the challenges is that, you know, a lot of people come up to me after class or during office hours to ask about career advice, right? You know, getting internships, getting jobs, how to build up their portfolio, how to kind of show their work and stuff. And one of the issues is that, how do people differentiate themselves? Because everyone just has the same resume. If you're just in a college, you're taking these classes, you might have done some research projects and stuff, and then, you know, you're applying at the career fair and stuff, and there's like a bazillion students, and you know, how do you differentiate yourself? And I think you gave a really good example of that. And again, it's an incidental. It's not like you planned this from, you know, the day you were born. It's just you were in an environment, given that kind of the right kind of milieu and timing, and you kind of had this natural curiosity and to kind of to be exposed to that. And Yeah, I don't have a really good advice to tell students besides just, you know, um, besides just find some way to differentiate yourself
Yeah.
from your peers. And it doesn't have to be this really purposeful thing. It has to be something you actually want to do. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's a hard challenge. I guess what I'm saying is it's my roundabout way of saying that, you know, you found after your first year, even of college, what people take all 4 years to find and may not even find, right? Like there are a lot of people who graduate from college in 4 years, they have a very generic resume, and then they have trouble finding jobs. They may be able to find some entry level job somewhere, and then they try to work their way up later in life. And you kind of were able to bypass that pretty much
Yeah.
completely.
Well, I mean, not, I don't want to, I mean, I think a huge part of that for me too is just like luck. Like, I think probably for everyone who like sort of ends up doing something um, non-traditional, or I guess like successfully does something non-traditional, there's like a huge like luck element. Like one thing that happened to me really early at Penn was I ended up like on the board of the student CS group, because when I was a pre-frosh, like visiting school, I like knew one person and then like crashed their dinner like for the board. So then I was this freshman that like the older students knew, and they needed someone to attend faculty meetings, which were at 10:30 in the morning.
Ah,
So early, but like I didn't know that because I was a freshman. And so they were like, oh, we'll find some freshmen who like is too naive to know that 10:30 is brutally early in the morning. And we'll get them to agree to like go to these meetings so we don't have to go.
well, that's actually an awesome example of no of the fact that, you know, you could say it's luck, but it's also that not everybody goes and crashes this meeting while they're a pre-frosh and then is open to the suggestion, oh, I'll go to these morning meetings. So I think when I talk to people who have been successful and consider themselves lucky in a way, of course, you know, there's luck in everything. I mean, it's lucky I don't get run over by a bus when I go downstairs today. I hope
Good
I
point.
don't.
Yeah.
But it's like you often find in these people, such as yourself, that there is something that, you know, whether it's curiosity or you know, other sorts of positive traits. These, you know, it's kind of like the doors are open due to luck, but then you have to actually step through it, right? You know, there are students struggling to get internships or to get projects off the ground or to get resume building experience, and they're panicked because this is their junior year or their senior year, and they're like, oh my God, I want to graduate soon, but I'm having trouble getting jobs. I'm sending out my resume everywhere. I'm going to these career fairs and meetups and stuff, and I just can't differentiate myself because I've just been taking a lot of classes and not doing independent projects and stuff. So
it's interesting that, you know, as a tech industry, we can sort of collectively complain about how hard it is to find engineers. And at the same time, you know, you have students saying that. Like, it's interesting that we're sort of in this position, right?
yeah, I mean, that's a whole other giant conversation about tech
Yeah.
hiring, which I'm not super an expert on, but it is true that, yeah, there's this imbalance on both sides of, I mean, I think the one way to put it is that just thinking about hiring on both sides is that I think it is hard to find really good people that
Sure.
are hardworking and work well and get along with people and are persistent and have the right skills and, you know, have the right motivation to teach themselves and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question that kind of comes out of that for me is like, is there something, you know, whether that's in college or some other mechanism that helps people bridge that gap from, you know, coming out of school with a degree or with some training, you know, some computer science experience, versus actually being like, you know, effective engineers. I think there's something about this that's not even unique to, you know, colleges and universities, but really just like figuring out how to take, and maybe this isn't unique to computer science or tech, even maybe this is just like the reality of what it means to like get good at your job. But you know, whether they're new college grads or boot camp grads or something, you know, people who have some skills, there's kind of like this gap between like that level and then like the level at which like people are really appealing hires. And it's like, I think like a 2 or 3 year gap often. Like sometimes, you know, at both companies I've worked at, sometimes we would meet people who were like smart and eager and had some formal training of one kind or another, but like without any real experience and without like the right person on our team to mentor them, we were like, we can't bring this person on. And so, you know, maybe it's just like, this is the nature of industry work across all industries, where you can get your formal training, but you need to sort of have like an apprenticeship period almost, where you have a mentor and you have someone, you know, you kind of get to have that like junior role for a while. But yeah, I think that's one of the gaps that like seems most striking to me right now. It's not even necessarily like learning interview skills, although I think that's also important and something that that should be taught in colleges. But yeah, filling that particular gap sort of between like, okay, you've like checked all the boxes, but there's still something that you have to like fill in before you can be really effective at what you do.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome thing. We should have a name for that gap, because I think that's an awesome, yeah, I mean, this issue of, you know, given this person with potential, if they had worked somewhere else for 3 years first, you know, if they had worked at Microsoft or Google for 3 years and gotten the whole full stack experience, they would be eminently hireable, because we know that they're smart, we know they're motivated, and they get along with us, but we just want someone with a little more experience. This is a super hard problem. And, you know, the way to start is to get some foot in the door with an early internship or an early research experience or something.
Yeah, it seems like the themes here are like timing is everything, and college is a forcing function.
Yeah, right? College is timing is everything. And another story about forcing functions is what was it? And that college is a great time to, and graduate school as well. I had a podcast earlier with one of my good friends from my PhD at Stanford, was that it's a great time to they connect together, because if you're in college for 4 years or in grad school for 4 or 5 years or whatever, that is a time when you can actually learn stuff and explore and be out of the specific job niche that you're in, right? If you're working at company X for those 4 or 5 years, you're probably heavily in one direction. You know, you're a machine learning engineer at Google, so you get really into machine learning. But if another trend starts coming up in like something else, it's hard for you to see that because you're down this machine learning train. So with my friend, he actually started doing online education stuff as well. And one of the things we talked about was that by being in a school environment, since you're not particularly committed to doing a full-time job in one path, it gives you the chance to get that timing right on whatever happens to come about, and such as you did, right? So if you were a few years older and you were already working in like, I don't know, if you're working on you know, mobile development for I don't know, Blackberries or something years ago, and this whole hackathon thing came about in the college scene and open source and hackathons and everything, you probably wouldn't have caught that because you were busy like optimizing your Blackberry code.
Right.
The Blackberry just exploded.
Yeah.
I think that I always like to wrap up by thinking, you know, if you had to either give advice to people who are coming up in this direction or, you know, give advice to your younger self, what thoughts would you have about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of touched on this at the beginning, but like, don't drop out of school unless you have a good plan. I would also say don't drop out of school if you love school. That's actually another thing where I know people who had really interesting opportunities outside of school and took them, but like really loved college and just were kind of miserable being away from it. And so I think, you know, maybe dropping out is relatively has been relatively trendy, or relatively, or like more accepted than it has been for the first time in a long time, or you know, something like that. But like, you know, for some people, college is just like wonderful, and I don't want to knock that at all either.
Well, one of the things you've kind of hit on really well is that is not to, you know, glamorize a certain life path of like, you must either like, you must get a college degree or else like your life explode, or like, oh, you must drop out because otherwise you miss on all of these great opportunities. Is that it really is, like you said, it's really dependent on the person.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe like the gist of it, and it's really hard to say this in a way that isn't corny, but like maybe the bottom line is just, you know, be open-minded and make decisions that are like authentic to who you are. And so staying in college when I was 19 was not authentic to who I was. Like, it just wasn't making me happy. It didn't feel like it was moving me in the right direction. And so, like, I just knew like deep down that the right thing to do is to leave and to pursue some of these other opportunities. But that was very personal, and that was very much about me being me and not trying to be anyone else. And I think like if somebody for whom that isn't the like authentic, personal gut feeling kind of thing to do would try to do it, I think they wouldn't have a very good time. So, you know, like I said, hard to say it in a way that's not corny, but I think at the end of the day, it really is about being authentic to yourself.